just say there are a lot of people like, now these days people always like to make excuses and maybe they're valid. But let's just say they have like less than $1,000 in your bank. Maybe how would you, let's just say that you're in that situation. I know you're pretty good right now, but let's just imagine that, you have a
Yeah,
thousand
yeah.
dollars in the bank. How would you use that money to build your portfolio to be a data engineer? Or it doesn't even have to be directly to a data engineer. Just say like, I want to be a data analyst first, then that will open me to opportunities to be a data engineer. So how would you play it out?
Yeah. So if you only have $1,000 in your bank account, so the first thing that I would do is that if this is something completely new to you, then you definitely need to have some kind of curriculum, some kind of background.
Mm,
So what I would probably recommend, maybe I shouldn't say maybe, but Coursera is a good place to start. For a few reasons. One is that the way that Coursera is set up is like a semester. So it has kind of like a college academic field, and there's academic professors teaching those courses. And normally at the end of the course, you have like a capstone project, right? And you could usually
right.
get a certificate from some prestigious schools. Like I believe I've seen probably Harvard, University of Michigan. I'm just naming a few.
Mm,
I would even say that I guess this is from a graduate perspective, but even there's something on Coursera, I believe, or separately from like MIT. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I think the first thing that I would do is focus on getting some kind of curriculum, some kind of certificate, right? So I would say again, Coursera has a lot of good courses, and again, because they have like kind of like the college feel of like a semester, academic professionals in the field and getting a certificate from a school, like could be a prestigious school or a school that is known for that particular field. So I would probably recommend getting involved or getting some certificates from Coursera.
yeah, just
And
interject some. Oh, sorry, just
oh,
interject
go
some
ahead, go
more
ahead.
other places like LinkedIn Learning is another good one.
Yeah,
Another
yeah.
good MOOC is Udacity, which gives free courses as well. So if you can't afford anything, there's practically like no reason unless you can't even afford a laptop. But let's just say $700, you buy the laptop, you'll be able to access those courses and be able to at least practice some basic data science stuff, and that could give you an idea on what direction to go with. Yeah, just popping in some ideas.
Oh no, no, yeah, definitely, definitely. Because you said a
Yeah,
thousand, so I was like, I think a Coursera certificate could be like maybe 100 something, two
yeah, that's
hundred.
true.
So that's why I was gonna start off with getting the Coursera as your kind of like academic backbone, and then when you go to like you said, like Udacity or Code Academy, because I know definitely like Code Academy and Data Camp, like they definitely have good exercises for the your code for coding, right? So
Right.
like I think kind of putting together these are kind of like your academic kind of background on top of the actual like the courses, the places you mentioned, and like Code Academy, they really focus on perfecting like the actual code, your coding ability. So kind of having, because you have to remember too, because you could be taking these courses, but then having that overview of what all of this means put together, kind of like big picture of the field that you're getting in. So having that kind of like academic certificate plus maybe like Code Academy or anything, LinkedIn Learning that focuses on the actual like coding skill set, doing some additional research about the field you want to get into, and then definitely signing up for workshops. There's a lot of workshops, especially in the city area, that especially like if you want to get in data science, they have a lot of workshops too, and that could be kind of your way as well of getting more knowledge, getting more experience, and then
I see.
finally, of course, putting the work of making your portfolio ultimately, and that would be what you present
Okay. And before
to
we
your
go into
managers.
portfolio, I'm curious, are there like specific courses or workshops that you know of that can help you give that opportunity to at least be have that background before you start your portfolio? I think you mentioned there's like some sort of hackathon too that maybe some data analyst or engineer people can try as well. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, so I believe there are some like hackathons, but I guess a few things that come into my mind, because there's so much resources, right? Even free resources, right? So
Right,
there's
right.
so much even free resources that you can use. So one example is like Kaggle.com. So Kaggle, they have like a lot of like different like data sets. So often they'll have kind of like a contest, right? Of like whoever comes up with the best like model based on this business case, based on this data set, then they'll get like some, I don't know, like I think it's gold, silver, bronze. And if you participate in those, it looks very good to an employer if you've achieved either any of those three, medals, I should say. I think even one of my friends, like her sister, I think her job, because she was working as a data scientist, they even made her do Kaggle contests. And she had to achieve like at least silver or bronze or something, actually. I guess to go
Keep your
forward, I
job.
guess, with the projects. Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
So they
god,
were
that's scary.
Oh, but that's what I'm saying. So like Kaggle contests, they have really high prestige. So, and I don't, and I, you definitely get some money. I think you get a money prize for it. So I would definitely want to record Kaggle contest for sure because it looks very good to an employer.
Mhm.
Especially if you want to get in data science, right? Because they evaluate your code, how the model looks like. And then second to that, I don't know all the places that have workshop, but I know like Metis is based, I believe is based in New York. So they have
Okay.
a lot of data science workshops, like a lot, if you just like go on their website, they even have like a data science, like, boot camp. And they have so many workshops, honestly, that I definitely would look at what they have. I don't know if they're located in other cities, but definitely like Kaggle. I would say Metis, they have really a lot of resources. You could even have a own network. They like have their own Slack channel for people that join that you could kind of connect with other people with in data science. So I
Oh
mean the
wow.
thing is so it's really cool. And I'll be honest, there's a lot more, I guess, resources to be like a data scientist versus like a data engineer. So I guess kind of going back as well to being a data engineer, what I think is also important is to understand what it means to be a software developer as well as know like principles of being a software developer. I don't know if that's the
Mm.
proper word.
Solid
Um,
principles.
yeah, the solid principles.
Solid
Yes.
principles.
The
Yeah.
solid principles. Yeah. And for example, even things that again, like for example, coding and data science is becoming so cool and like everyone wants to get into it. But just because you know some Python code that I've learned myself, that doesn't necessarily mean that your code is I'll say either good or code is something that could be really translated into production or being used actually for something, for example, within the company. So I had experience with Python, but with my major, I didn't have experience with Git. I didn't have experience with not even so much with SQL, but then going back to Git and the proper way of coding that I learned when I moved to being a data engineer. So I would say that if you want to be a data engineer or even a data scientist, that it is important to also understand the proper way of coding and version control and things like that, I would say too.
I see. So if we were to create Chantel's 5-step program to be a data engineer for a clueless guy, step one would be know the data science principles, which you can easily get from any basic course from Coursera or Udacity. Second is version control. Then once you try your project, you could refine it by doing certain principles, right? Or how would you construct that sort of pathway to like 5-step program just to be a close to be a data engineer or in the right direction?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, I'll be honest, at least from what I've seen, there's definitely more of a limited what's the word? Limited, like, I guess, coursework or workshops for data engineering
Right.
versus data science, to be honest, because data science is kind of becoming more, I guess, you know, I guess more, people want to get into it, which, is cool. I mean, data science is great. Um, but there are things from data science, of course, like data wrangling, data preparation, right? Those kind of things you could still kind of apply to data engineering. So what I would say is, again, going back to the courses, having some foundation in understanding what is data, understanding, kind of the basics of what is data manipulation or what is, data, how do you prepare data, and again, understanding the bigger space. And data integrity is very important, obviously, making sure the data that you have is good, it's good quality, the processes that you're making produce the right data. So I would definitely say having that background in data, again, knowing about the proper way of coding. At least that's how I'm framing it. But me being on the side of the company where I see the software developers and how they code, that's essentially how I had to learn to fix my code. So essentially going back to understanding like the solid principles, version control, all those things are also very important to being a data engineer.
I see. But
Yeah.
I'm curious. So you don't mind if I share some of your projects? I was looking at your LinkedIn
Oh yeah.
profile, and I think
Sure.
that would give people some good ideas on where to begin. You have some pretty interesting here. I'll just
Yeah.
focus on a window.
Sure.
Okay, here I'll share my screen. I want to start with something like much more fun. Like there's some two things that
Yeah.
already caught my eye, like this Harry Potter data-driven approach or predicting cyberbullying on Twitter. Which one of these do you feel like more passionate? Or which one was the most fun to you that you think also helped you with your job, finding a job in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah, this is good. So let's see, what do we have here? Yeah, I would definitely say so so two things. One is that
Mm.
predicting cyberbullying on Twitter. So that was kind of like my main project for one of my it was actually an NLP class, so it was like NLP with Python, natural language processing. So we had to come up with a business case, or in this case a social case of what kind of problem we're going to solve. And I think that's what I'm grateful for, the education I had, because sometimes in the field you'll have people that maybe they're working on a data project, but they may not understand what is the business case, what is really the stakeholders, what is the purpose of even doing this. And once you kind of establish that, everything else behind it makes more sense. So in this case, I came up with my team in terms of making a model that could help predict cyberbullying on Twitter, because you hear all these things on the news about kids hurting themselves, or being bullied online. Twitter, Instagram, social media is good, but it has obviously its level of toxicity, right? So with this project, we decided to make a machine learning model to predict if the tweets that we took a sample of tweets. Essentially, we labeled them ourselves based on literature. So there's some literature about cyberbullying, how researchers have identified what cyberbullying really means. So we kind of took what their principles were and we applied it to how we kind of made our data set. So we had some data where we put it as bullying, or if it's not bullying, based on what the researchers kind of said it was. And some of it was like more obvious.
Okay.
Um,
And
yeah.
just a quick question, like if you were to construct this, let's just say that you just had this idea of predicting cyberbullying on Twitter, but you don't have a college education. Do you think that although it might take longer, you might be able to construct something like this? Or are there certain three topics that gets 80% of what you need to build a project like this that you can learn from online?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honestly, I would say that you could probably do something like this based on just like learning about what natural language processing is, like what text mining is. There's so many projects that use Twitter now, like, Twitter APIs, it's like really easy to use. It's much more difficult to use like any other like social media API, right? So I think it's definitely a project that somebody could kind of do on their own, maybe
Hmm.
without like the education. But I think the project behind is really guided as well on, again, what I said, in this case not business, but I guess the social use case of what it is, what you're trying to solve, which again, I think this is a project that somebody else could do without like that background.
I see. I see.
But yeah.
So I think this is pretty good for anyone, like any of you guys who wants to like start with data engineering. Is that you might not be perfect, but as long as you like what you said, master version control. So you practice on how to use GitHub, know how to commit, how to even create some README files, which are pretty important when you share your projects to other people in your team, so they understand what's going on in your project. Good documentation, and just to show that you have potential to learn about other APIs, just having a good understanding of reading
Hmm.
different libraries and APIs and how to use them. That's pretty important. But in data engineering, also, I think I think you mentioned many times is that if I go back to your profile, I noticed that you right away chose cyberbullying and highlighted it because of a social use case. So it does help that, even though Harry Potter is a fun project, there's probably employers might be more interested into predicting cyberbullying because there could be a more market value towards creating some sort of product that centers
Hmm.
around this topic, right?
Yeah. So I want to add to that. So yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, like you said, so pretty much, yeah. When you make a project, the main thing you need to think about, again, of course, the coding, obviously, the model, all of that is important. What kind of insights you get from the model, but remember, at the end of the day, you have to kind of know who your stakeholders are. Maybe your model is something that you could understand. Like if I tell my manager, or not my manager, some other person in the company, oh, guess what? I made like a naive Bayes model. And they'll be like, what is that?
Yeah,
you
I don't know what
know?
is that either. Yeah, exactly.
Or like, any kind of machine learning model, like, oh yeah, I did like feature engineering. And they'll be like, what is feature engineering? Right. The point
Yeah.
so the point I'm trying to make is that, what I learned in interning and being in this company is that you really need to explain things in layman's terms sometimes. So you may do again, I'm not really doing data science in my field, but just in general, anything that you do, you need to understand, again, what the problem is, right? Because that's like probably one of the most critical things of applying to a job or getting hired. A lot of employers want to see that you have good critical thinking skills and you know how to solve problems. So kind of going back to the whole, when we were describing about kind of my experience. So a lot of the times the interview will ask you, name a time when, you had to do this under pressure, name a time when you had a situation, how did you solve that, right? So it's good to kind of have those experiences, those examples, and for, in this case, a project where you have an issue and you know how to solve it, and you could explain what the outcome is and how this could be applied elsewhere, because that's very valuable. That's a very valuable thing
Yeah,
to know how to
definitely.
do and explain. Yeah.
Yeah, true, definitely. And just like what you mentioned, also, it's very important to understand what your employers are. When you go to interview, think of it in a way to frame it like, "What can I do for you?" And here's my proof on why. So, I mean, I don't want to dissuade people. Like, if I look at your Harry Potter, it's still very fascinating to me. As a matter of fact, if I were an interviewer, I'd love to talk about it. But like, just to show what you kind of did, like, I could see you did multiple projects. So it comes to show that if you guys want to do data engineering, and it might not be perfect, but it's just that getting the momentum started on things that you do like, and eventually you can mature into things that are even a bit more complex, and employers would be enjoying that. But the second question: is data visualization important? And can you speak to us a little bit more about that? I have your Tableau profile on here, and I think
Hmm.
it seems like visualization is important, right? To be a data engineer, or not really?
Um, yeah, so a couple of things. So going back to the GitHub projects,
Okay,
so I would say that the projects that you're seeing here are really like data science projects, right?
right.
Most of them, or yeah, I would say all of these are data science projects. So I think this is like a good, like what we just discussed in terms of getting into, I guess getting into really any field with data, like those same principles apply. In terms of the projects that I did, this is more geared towards data science rather than data engineering. So data engineering, if you do want to be in data engineering, there's a little bit more you need to know, besides data science. You need to have an understanding of like what are APIs, what are
Hmm.
the different like database structure, architecture and building schemas. Again, my situation was a little, different than what most people, kind of have to do to become a data engineer. But I would say data engineer, there's a lot of other things that you do need to know and be educated about, to kind of get in that field versus just data science. Is what I just want to make note
I
of.
see. And like, if you're to build these workflows and schemas, like a portfolio, let's just say we're back to that $1,000 budget. So $700 to go to a laptop. I guess $100 if you want to host your data on Amazon S3, and
Hmm.
also I guess it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, a few dollars a month, and
Yeah.
additional money for using the API. So basically, you have enough money for at least a year to set up a project and maybe get some interviews regarding that with
Yeah, I
certain.
mean, it's totally. I mean, totally. What you could do is like Postgres. I believe Postgres is free. I believe, yeah, Postgres is free. So you could like make your own data set, have a Postgres database on your local. Kind of have like a layout in terms of what your database is, and then what you could do is that you can download Spark on your computer, and you can make some type of parallel processes between whatever data processes you're going to have that import that inserts data or updates data, and you can have a file that's code in S3. So I'll give an example about a project that I just did for my like recently for my job. So what it is that we kind of have another data source in the company. So what my like Python process does is that it takes that data source and then it kind of puts them into a file into S3. And then the second task is that it takes those files, it finds whatever differences are in our database versus in the data source. And if there's any differences, it creates those like JSON files, and then it uses that to insert, update the database. So I guess kind of pivoting toward data engineering is that's kind of I probably would say that's what you want to do. Kind of focus more on the data architecture, like the design aspect, and learning what parallel computing is, parallel processing is, and you could even orchestrate your own scheduled tasks, or I should say airflow. Kind of make your own tasks in your computers. So yeah, so there's I feel like data science, data engineering has some overlap, but I want to make it clear that data engineering is different, and there's certain things that you do need to know and have experience with versus data science.